The courtroom was so quiet you could hear the air conditioning, not the nervous quiet of a room waiting for bad news. The deep quiet of a room that had already made up its mind and was now watching that mind get changed in real time. Camille sat at the plaintiff's table in a structured navy suit, her hands folded on top of a leather portfolio, her eyes forward. She did not look across the aisle. She did not need to. She had stopped needing to look at Regina a long time ago. The judge set down a sealed envelope, cream-colored, slightly worn at the edges, the kind of envelope a man seals with intention, and cleared his throat. "Before I issue my ruling," he said, "there is one remaining item of record." Regina's attorney sat up straight. Regina herself did not move. She was composed the way a woman is composed when she believes she has already won. Hands laced, chin level. The small private smile of someone who had burned every letter, contested every document, turned every family member, and watched a young woman sleep on an air mattress with $42 and nothing left to fight with. She had no idea what was in that envelope, but Camille did. 3 years before that courtroom, Camille would have told you she was doing just fine. Not rich fine. Not even comfortable fine. Just fine in the way that Black women from working families learn to be fine. You count what you have, you don't count what you don't, and you keep moving. She was 29 years old, living in a one-bedroom apartment in East Atlanta, driving a 2016 Honda Accord with a crack in the dashboard she kept meaning to fix. She worked as an administrative coordinator at a mid-sized logistics firm off I-285. She was good at her job. She showed up early. She remembered people's birthdays. She made the coffee without being asked. Her father, Earl, called her every Sunday morning at 10. Not a text, a call. Earl was a retired postal worker from Decatur, a man who had carried other people's mail for 31 years and still believed in the power of the written word more than almost anything else. He kept legal pads in every room. He wrote letters, real letters by hand, to people he loved. He wrote to his sister. He wrote to old co-workers. He wrote to Camille. On her 28th birthday, he hadn't given her a card. He had given her a letter. 4 pages, front and back, written in his careful looping cursive on cream-colored stationery. It talked about the day she was born. It talked about watching her learn to ride a bike in the church parking lot on Hollowell Parkway. It talked about her mother, who had passed when Camille was 11, and how he saw her mother's steadiness in the way Camille moved through the world. It talked about the years he had spent driving the same mail routes, watching other people's lives through their correspondence, coming home to a daughter who was growing into someone he admired more each year. It ended with a single line that she had read so many times she could say it without looking. "Whatever comes, I already made sure you were taken care of. Remember that." She had kept that letter in a small tin box on her nightstand. Pale blue, with a floral pattern on the lid. The kind of box you buy at a craft store and repurpose for something more important than its original intention. Regina had been Earl's wife for 4 years by then. She was 61. Earl was 67. They had met at church, new birth, out in Lithonia, and married after a year of courtship. Camille had been there at the wedding, smiling in a coral bridesmaid dress, genuinely happy for her father. Regina was presentable, organized. She ran a tight house. She had 2 adult sons from her first marriage, both of them living in other states, both of them distant in the way that adult children can be when they have built lives away from the family drama they left behind. At first, Camille told herself everything was fine. She told herself that when Regina started answering Earl's phone when Camille called, she told herself that when the family Christmas gathering moved from Earl's house, where it had been for Camille's entire life, to Regina's eldest son's house in Charlotte, and nobody told Camille until the week before. She told herself that when she showed up at Earl's house one Sunday and found that the photograph of her mother had been moved from the mantelpiece to a box in the hallway closet, she did not say anything. She was trying to be gracious. She was trying to be a good daughter without being a difficult one. She did not yet understand that silence in the presence of someone like Regina is not grace. It is permission. The photograph was not the only thing that moved. Over the following months, Camille noticed the small archaeology of her own erasure. The frame of her parents' wedding, the original one from 1989, with Earl in a brown suit and her mother in cream lace, had been replaced on the hallway wall with a photograph of Regina and Earl at Myrtle Beach. The recipe box her mother had kept on the counter, the one with the handwritten index cards, the one Earl had maintained for 20 years because he couldn't throw it away, had disappeared from the kitchen. When Camille asked about it, Regina said she had reorganized the kitchen. She said it pleasantly. She said it without any awareness, or any pretense of awareness, that it might matter. What Regina understood, with the precision of someone who had done this before, is that you do not erase a person all at once. You do it slowly. You move a photograph. You change a contact list. You redirect a narrative at a dinner table. You do it in pieces small enough that each individual piece can be explained away, and by the time the whole picture is visible, you are already settled, and the person being erased is already being described as the difficult one. If you've been with us before, you already know this channel doesn't sugarcoat. We tell the whole story, from the bottom all the way to the top. If this is your first time here, take a second to subscribe and hit the bell, because what's coming next, you're going to want to be here for all of it. The first real cut came on a Tuesday in November. Earl had been having chest pains. Camille found out not from Regina, not from her Aunt Deborah, Earl's older sister who lived in Cascade, but from Earl himself, in a phone call where he mentioned it almost as an aside, the way men of his generation mention pain, like it's embarrassing to have a body that isn't cooperating. Camille drove straight to Piedmont Hospital. She was at the reception desk asking for Earl's room number when the nurse looked up her name in the system and said, "I'm sorry. You're not listed as an authorized contact." Camille stood there for a moment. "He's my father." "I understand, but the emergency contact on file is his wife, and she's designated as the sole authorized visitor for right now. I can't give you room information without her permission." Camille called Regina. Regina let it go to voicemail. She called again. Voicemail. She sat in that waiting room for 2 hours before Regina finally walked out of the elevator, looked at Camille sitting there, and said, not unkindly, not with obvious cruelty, just flatly, like she was reading from a list, "He's resting. I'll tell him you came by." That was it. That was all she said. Then she turned and walked back to the elevator. Camille drove home. She sat in her car in the parking lot of her apartment complex and did not cry. She was past crying. She was in the place past crying where you start to understand something about a situation that you had been refusing to see clearly. She called her Aunt Deborah. Deborah was Earl's only sibling, 64 years old, retired school teacher. A woman who prided herself on keeping the peace, which in practice meant she almost never took a side, except when she did, at which point she took it hard and without apology. "Auntie, she wouldn't let me in. She had herself listed as his only contact. I couldn't even find out what room he was in. There was a pause on the line. Camille? Deborah said carefully. Regina is his wife. Earl's household is hers to manage. That's just how it is. He's my father, Auntie. I should be able to see my own father in the hospital. I know it's hard, baby, but you don't want to come in there making trouble when the man is already stressed. That isn't good for him either. Camille hung up. She had a boyfriend at the time, a man named Kendrick, who worked in pharmaceutical sales and lived in Buckhead, who she had been with for 2 years and who she had believed, until recently, was the kind of man who showed up when things got hard. She told him what happened. He listened. He was sympathetic. He also gently said, I mean, is it possible you're reading into this a little? She's probably just stressed about your dad. People get protective. She looked at him. You think I'm overreacting. I didn't say that. You didn't have to. She didn't break up with him that night, but she filed it away. The way you file things away when someone shows you who they are before the real test comes. At a family dinner at Deborah's house the following month, there were 12 people at that table. Cousins, spouses, church friends who had become family over the years. Earl was there, thinner now, quieter, but smiling. And Regina, serving herself from the sweet potato dish, turned to the woman beside her and said, with a light laugh, and no awareness that Camille could hear it, Earl's daughter from before always looks like she's waiting for something bad to happen. Earl's daughter from before. Camille was sitting 4 feet away. Nobody said anything. Not one person at that table. They kept eating, kept talking, kept passing the rolls. And Camille sat there and understood, with a clarity she had not had before, that this was not carelessness. This was a woman who had been testing the territory for 4 years and who now knew, because nobody had ever pushed back, that she owned it. Earl looked up from his plate and caught Camille's eyes across the table. Just for a moment. He did not say anything either, but his expression said something. It said, I know. And it said, I'm sorry. And underneath both of those things, it said something else. Something she wouldn't fully understand until much later. I already handled it. Earl died on a Thursday morning in February. Heart failure. He had been in and out of the hospital for 3 months. Camille had seen him twice during that time. Once when Regina happened to be out, and a nurse let her in out of human decency, and once when Earl himself called her from his room phone and told her to come. She had sat with him for an hour that second time. He had held her hand. He had not said much. At one point he closed his eyes and said very quietly, the tin box. Keep the tin box. She thought he was talking about her birthday letter. She assumed he meant, hold on to it. Keep something of me. She would not understand what he really meant for another 2 years. The repast was held at New Birth Baptist. Camille came. She sat in the back because the front rows were full of Regina's people, and she did not want to fight for space on the day they buried her father. Her Aunt Deborah sat up front with Regina. She did not come to find Camille, not once, not in the receiving line, not at the repast. Camille watched her aunt laugh at something one of Regina's church friends said, a full, open laugh, and filed that away too. Not with bitterness, but with clarity. Grief does not pause for politics, but some people are very good at making it look like it does. At one point, Camille overheard a cousin of Regina's, a woman she had never met, look her up and down and say to someone next to her, just loud enough, which one is that? Is that the one from before? She left before the food was served. 3 days after the funeral, Camille received a certified letter from Regina's attorney, a firm out of Sandy Springs. It informed her that Earl had left a will. That will designated Regina as the sole beneficiary of the estate. The family home indicator, the pension beneficiary account, the joint savings, all of it. Camille was listed in one line as being entitled to personal effects at the discretion of the surviving spouse. Camille hired an attorney on a credit card, a woman named Phyllis Howard, out of a small firm in Vine City, who specialized in probate disputes, and who, when Camille sat across from her and laid out the whole story, said, "This is not unusual, and you have options, but you need to understand, this is going to be a process." During discovery, Phyllis requested correspondence between Earl and Camille. She was building a case to contest the estrangement narrative she suspected Regina would use. Regina produced letters from Earl's belongings, but the inventory was thin. And when Camille looked at the list, she noticed something. Every letter she had ever written to her father, birthday letters, Christmas letters, notes she had slipped under his door, was missing. She had written him letters every year since she was a teenager, because he had raised her to understand that written words outlasted everything else. Those letters were gone. Camille asked Phyllis to request them formally. Phyllis sent the demand. 3 weeks later, Regina invited Camille to the house in Decatur to discuss the personal effects. Camille came with Phyllis. Regina met them in the kitchen. Earl's kitchen. The one with the yellow curtains he had picked himself. The one where he used to make her Sunday breakfast when she was small. The one where he had taught her how to make cornbread from scratch on a winter Saturday when she was 9 years old, and had told her, while stirring, that anything worth knowing how to do was worth doing slowly. Regina was composed, pleasant almost, in the way that a person is pleasant when they feel entirely in control. She placed a tin box on the kitchen counter. Pale blue, floral pattern on the lid. It was Camille's tin box, the one from her nightstand. Regina had been in her apartment, or Earl had given it to her, believing it was safe. Either way, it was here now, in Regina's kitchen, open. Camille's body went very still. Regina reached in and removed a small stack of letters, cream-colored envelopes, Earl's handwriting on the outside. She held them over the gas burner on the stove. The flame caught the first one almost immediately. "Regina," Phyllis started. "These were Earl's personal correspondence," Regina said. "In his home. They are mine to manage." She burned them one by one, slowly, watching Camille the whole time. When she got to the last envelope, she held it over the flame and looked at Camille across that kitchen and said it like she had been saving it. "Dead fathers cannot protect unwanted daughters." Then she touched the last envelope to the flame. Let it catch. Let it go. She set the empty tin box on the counter and slid it across toward Camille. Then she smiled. The smile of a woman who believed she had just won. Camille picked up the tin box. She walked out. The preliminary probate hearing was 6 weeks later. Regina's will held. The documentation was in order. Phyllis challenged it, but the judge declined to rule in Camille's favor without more substantive grounds to contest. Camille was ordered to cease any claims against the property. Aunt Deborah testified. She sat in that courtroom and told the judge, under oath, that Camille had been distant from Earl in his final years. That Earl had confided in Deborah his sadness about the estrangement. That Regina had been his comfort and his partner, and that Earl had always intended for Regina to have everything. Every word of it was a lie. Camille sat at the table and listened to her father's sister lie about her father's love for her, and she did not flinch. She held it all inside like a woman pressing a hand over a wound, because she knows she has to make it to somewhere safe before she can let herself bleed. She called Kendrick that night. He said, "Maybe it's time to just let it go, Camille. You can't fight a will." She heard the exhaustion in his voice, not grief for her, exhaustion with her. She said, "Okay," and hung up. He texted once the next day. She did not respond. She did not hear from him again. That was the thing about hard times that nobody warned you about. They did not just take what was already gone. They clarified what had never really been yours in the first place. Kendrick had been kind when kindness was easy. A lot of people were kind when kindness was easy. But there is a different kind of person, a rarer kind, who is kind when it costs something. Camille was learning, in the hardest possible classroom, to tell the difference. She lost her apartment 3 months later. She had borrowed against her rent, expecting a legal resolution, and the math had not worked out. She moved in with her friend Tanya, who had a 2-bedroom in College Park, who set up an air mattress in the spare room and said, "Stay as long as you need," and meant it. Tanya was the rare kind. Camille did not take her for granted. The job was sympathetic. But Camille's performance had been slipping. Grief and court dates, and the way trauma sits on your chest at 4 in the morning when there is nowhere to put it. Her manager, a woman named Priya, pulled her aside one afternoon and said quietly, "I'm not putting you on a plan, but I need your back, Camille. I need the Camille I hired." That conversation stayed with her. She went home to Tanya's spare room. She sat on the air mattress. She opened her bag and took out the tin box. The empty tin box, the one Regina had slid across the counter like a taunt. She had kept it. She didn't know why at first, but she had kept it. And then she remembered. The birthday letter. 4 pages, front and back, cream-colored stationery, the letter Earl had given her on her 28th birthday. She had always kept that one at her apartment. Not at his house, not anywhere Regina could reach it. She hadn't lost everything. She found it in the bottom of the bag she had packed when she left her apartment. She unfolded it carefully. She sat on that air mattress in the dark and read it. She read it twice. She read the last line 3 times. "Whatever comes, I already made sure you were taken care of. Remember that." And then she read the line before it, the one she had always skimmed past. "If anyone ever tries to make you feel like you don't belong to me, remember that I already spoke to someone about that." She had read that line before. She had assumed it was metaphorical, Earl being poetic, Earl being protective. But sitting there on that air mattress with nothing left to lose, she let herself ask, what if he meant it literally? She did not know the answer. Not yet. She folded the letter back into its envelope and put it in the tin box and closed the lid. She lay back on the air mattress in the dark. She made a decision. Not a big dramatic decision. A quiet one. The kind of decision that doesn't announce itself. She decided to stop waiting for the situation to resolve itself. She decided to get up. Getting up did not look the way it looks in movies. It looked like Camille setting her alarm for 5:30 and making coffee before Tanya was awake. It looked like her staying an extra hour at work, not because Priya asked her to, but because she had noticed inefficiencies in the vendor coordination system that nobody had bothered to fix, and fixing them made her feel like herself again. It looked like Priya, 2 months later, calling her into the office and saying, "I want to promote you to operations supervisor. This a yes?" It looked like a Saturday morning, 3 months after that, when Camille drove to a small business development workshop held in the Fellowship Hall of New Zion Baptist Church in Decatur. A different church, not the one that had closed ranks around Regina. The facilitator was a woman named Lorraine, 60 years old, natural hair, reading glasses pushed up on her head, who ran a logistics consulting firm out of a small office in Midtown. Lorraine stood up at the front of that room and said, "I don't care where you're starting from. I care about what you know, and what you're willing to do with it. Camille stayed after the session. She introduced herself. Lorraine listened to her background: administrative coordinator, now operations supervisor, 7 years in logistics, and said, "You understand the back end of this industry in a way that a lot of people don't. That's worth something." 6 weeks after that, Lorraine offered her contract work. Camille took it and worked nights and weekends. She opened an LLC with $800 she had saved over 3 months, filing the paperwork herself on a Tuesday evening at the kitchen table while Tanya watched television in the next room. She named it Earl Made Logistics Consulting. She chose the name privately, as a permanent record of who she was building toward. She told no one in the family. She told no one from that church. She built it in silence, the way her father had always told her to do important things: quietly, carefully, and with receipts. There is something about building in silence that the self-help world does not talk about enough. It protects you. When you build loudly, you give the people who do not want you to succeed advance notice. You give them time to organize their doubt, their skepticism, their gentle suggestions that you are reaching too far. Building in silence means that by the time anyone knows what you're doing, it is already done. The deed is already filed. The contract is already signed. The foundation is already poured. All they can do at that point is look at it. She did not feel triumphant. She felt focused. There is a difference. Regina, during this time, was still circulating a story. Camille heard it secondhand, through cousins she still kept in loose contact with. The story was that Camille had been unstable, that she had harassed Regina during Earl's illness, that the legal challenge had been baseless and driven by greed. The story had legs because there was nobody left in the family structure willing to contradict it. Camille heard the story and kept working. 18 months after the air mattress, Earl Made Logistics Consulting had 3 corporate clients and 1 government contract through a small business set-aside program. Lorraine had brought her into a larger deal, a regional distribution partnership that required exactly the kind of operational oversight that Camille had spent 7 years quietly learning how to do. She was earning more than she ever had. She had moved into her own apartment, a real one, with furniture she chose herself, a bed with a frame, a desk in the corner of the bedroom. She put the tin box on the desk. She was sitting at that desk one evening when she unfolded the birthday letter again. She still read it sometimes, not from grief now, but from something else. Something she couldn't name precisely, maybe just the need to hear her father's voice. And she read the line again. I already spoke to someone about that. She had been putting off a phone call. She didn't know why. Maybe because she was afraid of what she might not find. Maybe because she had already lost so much that she had learned to manage her hope carefully, the way you manage a flame in the wind. She made the call. She had found, through her probate attorney Phyllis's research, a reference to an estate attorney in Decatur named Walter Odom, a small firm, solo practitioner whose name had appeared on a document receipt from 3 years before Earl's death. Phyllis had flagged it early in the case, but they had never been able to reach him. Camille had the number. She dialed. A man answered on the 3rd ring. Odom Estate Law. My name is Camille. My father was Earl. I believe he may have been a client of yours. A pause. Not an uncertain pause. A careful one. What is your full name, your date of birth, and your father's full name? She told him. Another pause. Longer. Miss Camille, Walter Odom said, I've been waiting for this call for 3 years. Your father left very specific instructions. He told me you'd call when you were ready, and he told me not to reach out first. He said, and I'm quoting him directly here, "She'll come when she's standing on her own 2 feet. Don't go to her before that. She needs to find her way there herself." Camille sat very still at that desk. "What did he leave?" she asked. "2 documents, a letter addressed to a court of law, and a codicil to his original will, properly witnessed, properly notarized, executed 3 years before his death." Walter Odom paused. "The will Regina submitted, Miss Camille, was dated after this one. Which means one of 2 things. Either it supersedes my document, which I don't believe it does, based on the circumstances and the language, or it was executed under conditions we can challenge. Either way, I think you need to come in." Camille looked at the tin box on her desk. She called Phyllis Howard the next morning. Phyllis filed a motion to reopen the probate case on new grounds within the week. Regina was served. Regina's attorney filed to block the hearing. Standard delay. He cited procedural grounds. The statute of limitations on contesting a will in Georgia, the prior ruling, the principle of finality. For 1 week, Camille's motion sat in legal limbo, pending a judge's decision on whether it would even be heard. Her attorney called her on a Thursday afternoon. "It's close," Phyllis said. "He might dismiss it on procedural grounds before we even get to present the envelope." Camille sat with that for a long moment. "What do we do?" "We filed a response this morning. I found a procedural counter. The new evidence exception is broader than their attorney is claiming. The judge has discretion here. It's going to come down to whether he decides to hear it." On a Friday, the ruling came. The hearing was granted. Regina's attorney called for a settlement conference. Camille declined. She was not interested in a settlement. She was interested in the record. Regina arrived at the Fulton County Courthouse on a Tuesday morning in March, in a burgundy blazer and matching heels. Her attorney was beside her. Aunt Deborah was in the gallery, along with 3 or 4 family members and 2 women from New Birth who had apparently come to bear witness. They had the look of people who expected a spectacle and had arrived early for good seats. They expected to see the Camille from 3 years ago, the one with $42 and a garbage bag of clothes, the one who slept on an air mattress, the one they had broken in a kitchen in Decatur with a gas flame and a smile. Camille walked into that courthouse at 8:45 in the morning. She wore a structured navy suit. Simple, precise. Her hair was pulled back and she carried a leather portfolio under her arm. She walked at her own pace. Not fast, not slow. The pace of a woman who was not afraid of the room she was walking into. The bailiff held the door. She thanked him by name. She had looked up the court calendar and noted who would be on duty that day. She greeted Phyllis Howard at the table, set down her portfolio, and sat. She did not look at Regina. She did not look at Aunt Deborah. She did not look at the church women from New Birth who had come to watch her lose. She looked at the front of the courtroom, at the judge's bench, at the flag standing still in the corner, at the clock on the wall that said 8:48. She breathed. She arranged her hands on top of the portfolio. Aunt Deborah leaned over to the woman beside her and said something in a low voice. One of the churchwomen shifted in her seat. Regina's composure was intact. She was good at that. Always had been. But her attorney leaned over and said something to her. And for just a moment, just a fraction of a second, something moved across Regina's face. Not fear, exactly. More like recalculation, like a woman who had come in with a plan and was now noticing at the margins that something in the room was not where she had expected it to be. Camille noticed. She looked back at the clock. The judge entered. Everyone rose. Phyllis Howard presented the motion. She laid out the grounds for reopening. She presented the chain of custody documentation for the sealed envelope, submitted from Walter Odom's office, notarized, time-stamped, unimpeachable. Regina's attorney objected on procedural grounds. The judge overruled. The attorney tried again, on different grounds. The judge said, "Counselor, I've read the briefs. The objection is noted and denied. Let's proceed." He picked up the envelope. The courtroom was completely silent. He broke the seal. Inside were two documents. The judge read the first one, a letter, handwritten, cream-colored stationery, Earl's careful looping cursive, silently. Then he read portions of it into the record. Earl had written it 3 years before his death. He had addressed it to whoever is reading this in a court of law. He had written that he was of sound mind, that he anticipated interference with his estate, and that he was creating this record specifically because he understood that not all interference announces itself in advance. He wrote Camille's name. He wrote about their relationship, the Sunday phone calls, the visits, the letters, the birthday afternoons at his kitchen table. He referenced phone records he had obtained from his own carrier, printed and notarized, now attached as exhibits. He referenced a log he had kept, a handwritten calendar, one of his legal pads, documenting every visit, every call, every birthday card, every dinner. He wrote, "My daughter was never estranged from me. Anyone who says otherwise is not telling the truth, and I believe they will say it because I believe they will have reason to." He wrote, "My sister Deborah is a good woman who will do what is easiest. I am not angry with her. But I am not going to let what is easiest become the record of what was true." He named Regina. He wrote that Regina was aware, as of the date of this letter, that he had executed a separate legal document with Walter Odom. He wrote that any future claim of ignorance on her part was false. Then the judge read the last paragraph, and the courtroom, which had already been quiet, went quieter still in that particular way of a room where people are trying not to show that they are moved. Earl had written, "I want the record to say plainly what I know to be plainly true. My daughter Camille has been the finest thing I ever had a part in making. She is her mother's steadiness and her own particular courage. She showed up for me when showing up cost her something. She never made me choose. She never made me prove it. She already knew. I am writing this letter because I want a court of law, if it ever comes to that, to know it too." The judge set the letter down. He wrote, "I loved my wife, but I loved my daughter longer and I loved her first, and I intend for the record to say so." The courtroom was still. Regina's composure had not broken, but it had changed. The calculation behind her eyes was working very fast now, and the results were not coming up in her favor. The judge set down the letter. He picked up the second document, the codicil. Properly witnessed, properly notarized, signed by Earl and 2 witnesses who had since provided sworn affidavits confirming their signatures. The codicil established Camille as the primary beneficiary of the family home in Decatur, the pension beneficiary account, and the personal property including all correspondence and papers. The codicil predated the will Regina had submitted by 14 months, which meant that unless Regina's will could be shown to have superseded it through a later lawful instrument, which it could not, because the chain of execution was clear and documented, Regina's will be not the controlling document. Phyllis Howard said, Your Honor, we would also ask to submit Plaintiff's Exhibit C. She slid a document across to the bailiff. This is a letter in Earl's handwriting, authenticated by a forensic document examiner, written to the plaintiff on her 28th birthday. It is submitted to establish handwriting consistency and to demonstrate the ongoing, affectionate, and legally aware nature of Earl's relationship with his daughter, which stands in direct contradiction to the testimony provided in the prior hearing. The bailiff carried the exhibit to the judge. It was the birthday letter, the one from the tin box, the one Camille had kept at her own apartment, on her own nightstand, the one Regina had never been able to reach. The judge examined it briefly. He set it in the record. Regina's attorney requested a recess. The judge looked at him over his glasses for a long moment. Denied, he said. I've heard enough to rule. He voided Regina's will on the grounds that it had been superseded by the prior lawful codicil, and that the circumstances of its execution warranted referral for further review. He ruled in Camille's favor. He restored the estate. Aunt Deborah was already on her feet and moving toward the door before the judge finished his last sentence. She did not make eye contact with Camille. She did not stop. She was gone before the gavel came down. The churchwomen sat very still. Regina did not look at Camille. She gathered her things methodically, deliberately, the way she did everything, with control, with composure. But her hands, Camille noticed, were not quite steady. Phyllis leaned over and said quietly, We won. Camille nodded. She reached into the leather portfolio and took out the tin box. Pale blue, floral pattern on the lid. She opened it and put the birthday letter inside. She closed the lid. She held it in her hands for a moment. Then she set it on the table in front of her and sat back and breathed. She did not move back into the house in Decatur. She thought about it. She stood in the doorway of it on a Saturday morning in April, when the yellow curtains were still in the kitchen windows and the dogwood in the backyard was in bloom, and she thought about what it would mean to live inside that grief every day. She decided that her father had not fought to leave her that house so that she could spend her life haunted by it. He had fought to leave her the choice. She sold it. She used the proceeds to set up a trust. She designated a portion of it to fund a legal aid program through Georgia Legal Services, specifically for estate disputes in Black families. Families who had been pushed out of their inheritances through intimidation, forged documents, and the assumption that they did not know their rights or did not have the resources to fight for them. She named the fund after her father, Earl Maid. She kept running the consulting firm. It grew. Lorraine brought her into a second major partnership. She hired 2 people. She moved into a proper office. On her desk, in that office, she kept the tin box. The same pale blue box with the floral lid. Inside it, the birthday letter. The last thing she had of his voice that no one had been able to take. She thought sometimes about what her father had known, and when he had known it. That he had sat across from Regina for 4 years, watching, measuring, loving his wife, and also understanding her. Understanding that love and caution are not opposites, that a man could love the people in his life and still be wise enough to protect the most important one from what might come after he was gone. He had done it quietly, without telling Camille, because he had not wanted to burden her or poison her relationships before there was reason. He had simply built the record. He had simply told Walter Odom to wait. He had raised her to know that the written word outlasted everything. And then he had used the written word to save her. She thought about Regina in that kitchen, holding that last envelope over the flame, certain that burning a letter could erase a love, certain that Ash could undo what a man spent 31 years of Sunday phone calls building. She thought about how sure Regina had been. The kind of sure that comes from a long history of getting away with things. The kind of sure that mistakes silence for agreement, and absence for weakness, and patience for defeat. And she thought about what her father had understood that Regina never did. You cannot destroy what was never in the room with you. The copy was already gone, sealed, delivered, waiting. 3 years before the flame, 3 years before the kitchen, 3 years before the smile. There is a thing Camille understood now that she wanted to pass along, not as advice, but as the truth she had come to through the hardest door. A person who tries to erase you is not powerful. They are afraid of your documentation. They are afraid of your receipts. They are afraid of what happens when the right room is finally listening. Your job is not to fight every battle in the room where it's picked. Your job is to build in silence until you choose the room. And when you choose it, walk in slowly. Let the room do the work before you say a word. Her father chose the courtroom. She chose the office. You will choose yours. If this story moved you, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe if you haven't already. Every week we bring you another story about ordinary people who refuse to stay down. Drop a comment and tell us, has anyone ever tried to use your grief against you and lived to regret it? We read every single one, and before you go, the tin box is still on her desk. The letter is still inside. Some things, when they are built right, do not burn.